As a business owner, you have a choice. You can stay in that hustle and grind mode thinking that business is hard, or you can shift the one critical piece that would actually allow you to get into the space of having a business be easy. Not effortless, but easy. And here's the difference. Here's what I see. I work with a lot of people who are highly successful, very driven, and they're up in the 6, 7, 8 and above figures, but as long as they are still, unresolved pieces in their mindset, as long as there is trauma stuck in their body, then they tend to get tapped into this belief that they need to suffer, that they need to work hard. And that ends up perpetuating how they show up in the world, how they move with their staff, what systems they actually implement, all of those things. It all comes down to, mindset, if you want to call it, but I would say the deeper level of who you are as a human being, how you're moving, how you're showing up. And if you don't think that your business, that you have the greatest impact on your business, I'm here to tell you that you're wrong. You changing what's going on internally has the single greatest effect on your business. Let me say that again. That is the single greatest effect on your business. So the most important thing you can do is to be working on yourself. Because here's the reality, is that you know what systems are going to work for you. You know that you need to communicate with your staff. You know that you've got underperforming team members, but why don't you deal with them? So let's look at that. Why don't you deal with it? Well, if we look at the idea of, where trauma gets stuck in the body, and trauma can be anything. It can be, constantly being put down or being bullied as a kid, or it can be, some of the more bigger traumas that we think of. But when that gets stuck in the system and subconsciously our brain has this idea of, this is the pattern, this is how I show up, this is how I move, then on a subconscious level, we end up implementing that in our business as well. And so when there are challenges with the staff, we tend to not address them right away. It's like, oh, well, that's normal. That's the way it should be. But if we actually sit down and we say, okay, what do I want to change in my brain? What do I want to change, as a human being? What do I want to shift? And we start to actually take the steps to move out of this dynamic of life is hard, life is a struggle, I deserve to suffer, those kinds of crazy but subconscious programming. We start to move out of those. Then what happens is that you read a book, say like Mike Michalowicz's Clockwork, which details the instructions of how to actually move your business into having systems and having somebody else run it. When you read that book and you don't have any of the subconscious sabotage, you're going to implement. You're going to look at that and you're like, oh yeah, let me grab that nugget and that nugget and that nugget and implement. But as long as we have the subconscious programming in there, keeping us in these loops of, I need to suffer, I need to work hard, that's the way it's valid, all of these interesting and yet somewhat crazy ideas, then you read that book and you're like, oh, well, that'll never work for me. That's the thought that can go through your head, or yeah, that's good, I'll do that later. But you don't get around to it. So changing these things, changing the dynamics of how we move, how we show up. We can break this down into kind of a 3-part process. One is changing the actual programs in the subconscious brain, changing those conditioned responses. So we end up with conditioned responses from our past, and at some point it was not safe to show up, it was not safe to speak up, it was all of those things. So we need to change those conditioned responses. And there's a variety of tools that are available for changing the subconscious beliefs. Of course, I work with a lot of them. We won't get into them in depth, but I'm sure at this point you've come across a lot of different tools and techniques. So start working on, if you want to do it yourself, start working on, what is the beliefs. Write them down. What are those beliefs that you carry? And then start changing those at a subconscious level, not just cognitively, not just getting them out, but actually changing the imprints in your system. So that's kind of step one. of making these changes. Step 2 is to start conditioning in what you want. So we want to also look at programming the subconscious mind for where we want to go. And again, there's a lot of different tools and techniques, right? There's a lot of things that will help you get to that place. There's visualizations, and there's, again, the subconscious beliefs for removing the trauma. You can also use those kinds of subconscious beliefs or techniques, I should say, the techniques to change and put in some new imprinting. And then the third thing is we need to follow it up with action. So all of these things together create the dynamic changes inside so that it changes what's going on outside. So we need to remove the old beliefs, put in new beliefs basically, and follow it up with action. Now, I find for a lot of my clients that, it's like, this already, it's good, the steps, but why aren't you taking it? Maybe it's not been all that safe to do it yourself, or maybe it's not all that comfortable, or maybe you're just the type of person that works better with somebody, and having somebody there to make sure you stay with it, stay focused, because sometimes, let's be honest, it's not that easy all the time to be both the therapist and the client at the same time, guiding yourself through to look at what you don't want to look at, right? It's sometimes not that easy. So this is why it's really helpful to work with somebody, whether you work with me or with somebody else, but to work with somebody who can hold that space, who can hold you accountable, make it safe, do it fast and effective, and get you moving so that you can get into action. Because I believe that you already know what you need to do to change your business, but it is the internal pieces that are keeping you from actually implementing all of the brilliance that you have in there to grow the business in the way that you want to grow it, to have that outcome, but to have it without grinding yourself into the ground or putting yourself into the hospital. So if you would like some help on this journey to grow your business with ease by changing the internal landscape, which of course affects the rest of your life, I am here. Let's get you booked in for a consultation. We can talk about what's the roadmap, what do you need to put in place. The consultation is, of course, complimentary, and we're going to talk about, does it make sense? Does it make sense for you and I to work together? And if not, let's give you some other ideas. All right, head over to bookdana.in. We'll see you there.